Gentlemen, welcome to the Medalist Shop Talk podcast. I am your host, Andrew Panaccio, and it is my job to interview interesting and agentic people doing interesting and agentic things. My guest today is David Bessis. David is a mathematician who holds a PhD in pure mathematics from the University Paris-Cité and is the author of the book Mathematica, A Secret World of Intuition and Curiosity. Our conversation today is wide-ranging, and we cover a ton of ground. Topics include parenting, Taleb, creativity, writing, religion, and mathematics, how he uses LLMs, and much, much more. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy our conversation. Just a couple of questions to get us going. I'm always really interested in people's morning routines. What did you have for breakfast this morning? How did you start your day?
Oh, so my morning routine is destroyed by the fact that I have two kids,
Okay.
a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old. So it's taking care of my kids, being woken up by my kids, and having breakfast with them. So this morning it was bread and honey.
Bread and honey. I
and
like
tea.
it. I have twin 2.5-year-olds. They're a little older than that now, and so you might hear them banging at my door. And you might hear them screaming, but you can relate, so that's good. Any music you're currently listening to or enjoying?
So I'm listening to the music my kids want to listen to. So the 1-year-old he loves music.
Yeah.
And he loves the Goldberg variations by Glenn Gould and
Nice.
Kraftwerk Trans-Europe Express. So that's two main things. Very, very open-minded. He's very open-minded, so I encourage that.
Nice. Trying to nudge my kids in the classical music direction. We're getting into the Nutcracker at the moment as time is coming around, so it's been fun. Nice. Anything that you're currently excited about? Books, something you purchased, something that's making your day better on a regular basis that you have to tell your friends about?
I'm working on a book, so I'm excited by the ideas and the thing I see around that inspired me for this book. One topic that's been something that keeps shocking me like day after day and week after week is the nature of the nurture debate.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it's being reframed by new stuff coming out from genomics. So that's very interesting. Very tech, but very interesting. Yeah. I read a lot about that.
Okay, that's great. Real quick, so before I forget to ask you, how the heck did you find me? I'm a relative nobody.
So I think, so you made this entry about my book, and I think I have some Google alerts, something that redirected me to that, and I read that, and I saw the like dozens and dozens of quotes, which is, I think, the best way to review a book is just to say what you highlighted in the book. Yeah. And I really liked it, so I connected with you.
Nice. Well, I appreciate that. I think, and I mean, you can probably tell this by the little write-up that I did. It has such good sentences in it. Like I found myself highlighting just constantly, and because the sentences were so good, not because the paragraphs are like, as a lot of books, I'm like highlighting the whole page or something, and I'm just like, man, like these sentences are so good and so crisp. So
that was actually something that's why I was so happy when I read your recap, because I tried to achieve that when I was writing it. I was thinking very often I was on stage doing stand-up comedy or something, so I wanted to have punchlines. Like there is a punchline nearly every page. There was at some point there was a bit too much, so I had to tone it down. But I think books should be impactful, So it's really at the sentence level that I'm personally impacted by books usually.
Yeah. Well, you did an excellent job. I hope to someday be able to achieve some level of prowess like that with my writing. So thank you for publishing it. Thank you for taking so much time to condense it down into those wonderful sentences. It was really, really a joy to read. Is this your first podcast in English?
I think so. I'm confused because I'm, a podcast when you listen to it, it's a podcast, but when you do it, it's like you're doing a video call with someone. So sure. I may have had some podcasts not realizing they were a podcast, but I think it's the first one, but I'm not entirely sure.
Okay. I did some digging because after I read the book, or I do this often, after I read a book, I'm like, oh, I got to find every podcast interview that this person's ever done. And there was really only one, and it was like a YouTube video and it was all dubbed in French, which I am not fluent in. And so it was not quite as enjoyable to listen to. So hopefully this will be the first English version of it, and we can turn some.
This is an exciting thing for me. The book went out a couple of months ago, but there was basically no press at the beginning, so it was mostly through social networks. Okay. Recently, there's been the Quanta article, so the traffic has increased, but you're still the first one, probably.
Okay, well, that's exciting. Thank you for doing this and joining me here today. So you mentioned a new book, and as we were setting this up, you said you were on a writing retreat. How was the writing retreat? Can you tell us anything about the new book?
Yeah. So writing retreat, first, it's related to the fact that I have kids, and I find it very hard to write with kids at all. I'm working in an office. I have a studio that I'm using as an office that is like 15 minutes from my house. But still, the morning routine, if I was in writing mode without kids, I would wake up, make some tea, start writing immediately. I cannot do that, so I have to take some breaks. It went well. I cannot really say what the book is about, but I can say why I'm writing it, because it's related to the topics of the conversation. So Mathematica, the book I just published, is about basically reframing mathematics and the experience of doing mathematics in a way that connects with what happens in our brains. And doing that, I also say that, mathematics is not about some innate talent, but something that you develop, that you can grow within you. What's interesting is everybody, especially all mathematicians, agree with my reframing of mathematics. It's something they feel very deeply. That's why I have some prominent mathematicians saying, the book speaks personally to me. It's exactly what I experience when I do math. So on that side, I have like 100% approval from normal people. On the math isn't innate, I have like 50% approval, 50% rejection. And it's incredibly violent in a way. Like on social media, I see things like when there was this Quanta piece, there was a discussion on Hacker News about my book. And there was people basically saying, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a flat earther. He has no clue. He claims there's not math. It's kind of crazy. And there are people who like the book, who say, the book is great. I like what you said about math, but why do you say it's not genetic? I mean, it's wrong. So I think this is a fascinating thing. There is like a big divide within society right now, with some people very deeply convinced of something and other people very skeptical of the same thing. Yeah. And it's cultural, it's very tech, very scientific, but I think at the root it's something about misconception about determinism versus randomness, which connects to Taleb also, which I know you're a big fan of. So it's a very interesting thing, and I think there is I should do some kind of follow-up on that.
In my little article, I wrote, that I kind of fell into this trap of, I'm just not good at math, and it's really easy to do as a teen, a child, right? Kind of just default to that because it's such a polarized thing where people look at you or they say something to you and you're like, oh, like just don't worry about it. Like math's not your thing, right? Like focus on something else. I think I grew up playing a lot of sports. And you see a lot of the same thing where it's like innate ability, right? And you're just a natural born athlete versus like somebody who works really hard and can improve over time, right? And it's really, as I've grown up and I've seen some of my previous teammates, it wasn't the ones that were spectacularly talented. It was the ones that improved a little bit every year and they never stopped improving that made it to the professional level, right? In an athletic endeavor. And so when I look back at that, I'm like, okay, well, athletics, math, like there's kind of these two polarizing points of view where, you're either born or you're made, and people feel very strongly have found that most things are a skill and they can be developed. And it's really this mindset of having that change and be like, okay, if I were to take this step by step and break it down, how could I make progress over a long period of time? I like what you say in your book about how the body takes time to change. And I'm really fascinated with this point of time where your body starts to change and you kind of start to get some momentum and you start to make visible forward progress. It happens physically with athletics, and I think it happens mentally when you're working through something, like the hard sciences, math, like the same thing, right? But I never stuck it out long enough, essentially, in any of those worlds to get there, even though I probably would have really enjoyed it and would have really, thrived in that type of endeavor. But
yeah, that's a very so I really agree with the parallel, because actually it's one of the key statements from my book. The thing is, with math, it's not clear what you have to do to train, and that's it. I think this is where this idea that it's innate comes from. If you want to improve your running, you just have to run, and you know how to run because you know how other people are running, and people can look at you and they understand why you got better. They saw you every morning waking up and going for a run. When you do the same thing with math, it's very diffused. It's something that's scattered throughout the day. It's not really writing. It's not really reading. It's kind of meditating, kind of very half focused, half not focused. It's very bizarre, very iterative process, very hard to put in words. And it's clear that this process is not something we learn at school. So there is a missing thing. Now, it's still very hard for people to believe that this missing thing is actually responsible for such massive gaps. And the massive gaps of talent is something that is impressing to everybody. I mean, when you look at running, like Usain Bolt, when he is 9:58 record, I think he ran like 1.5% faster than the second guy in the same race. In math, it's like 1,000 times faster. So there's something unbelievable, and it's a big challenge for people to come up with any clear explanation of how such thing is possible, like such bizarre talent gap between people.
Something along those. So I'm a runner. I went for a run before this early when it was dark in the morning. I run every day at the same time, same mileage. Do you run? Are you a runner?
I try to. I'm not a good runner actually, but I do a little bit.
See, it's a mindset. You probably are. You probably are better than most runners. Okay, so I will never be Usain Bolt, right? Like I am not genetically capable of firing my muscles in that sort of manner, right? I don't have the size. I don't have the strength. Probably never will get there. But I can improve at running, right? I started running, and I would just like to get a little bit better at running forever, right? Or for as long as genetically.
But you can run. And my point is not that everybody can do math like Terry Tao. It's like everybody can do math at a certain level, which is a very modest claim. And still some people think it takes a very unique alignment of genes to be able to do, let's say, college math, which I think is basically everybody should be capable of it with adequate training.
And then that's where I'm so fascinated by this, is because I think I struggled with college math. I don't know that I really deserved to even pass the class, to be honest with you. And I felt like I was just out to sea, didn't know where, like, I would love to have run every day, right? Metaphorical or the analogy, right? But I didn't even know how to start taking the steps to improve. I didn't know where I was lost or off track. I don't remember where I was like, where it stopped making sense. And it is math like a linear progression like that, where if you skip something or miss something, you're kind of, out to sea for the rest of it, or you have to understand the whole thing, or can you skip some things and come back and do that?
It's not like linear, but like multiple ways.
Yeah.
But it's very exponential in terms of, you stack abstractions on top of abstractions. So if you unlock a certain viewpoint, for example, the day you start thinking in terms of categories, like you drastically change. It's like learning to use letters instead of numbers. This kind of jump in abstractions, and there's probably a dozen like things like moving from numbers to letters, from moving from letters to, I don't know, linear algebra and categories and whatever. And it's incredible how much better you become. Like you become like a Superman at some point compared to what you were before, and you're still extremely weak compared to the people who are better than you.
Right.
And you're always in that tension between being super brilliant and absolutely dumb. You feel, you experience both things at the same time, which is, some people find disconcerting. I find that very interesting. I think it's a very interesting position to be from an emotional standpoint. Like you're both arrogant and modest at the same time.
I think it's a more compelling feeling as an adult. As a young person, you feel inadequate, I think, a lot of the time, and that's much more difficult to grapple with. How did you, like, in your mathematical progression, you a gifted child? Where, was it always like something that you were interested in and good at, or was there something you had to overcome?
So I was, I, I thought I was gifted in the sense that I was very good from a very young age. I don't think it's a gift. I have
Sure.
some explanation of things that happened to me in the early months of my life, some very unusual things. And it's a pattern that you see in the biographies of many mathematicians. In my book, I give the example of Thurston was this issue with not being able to see 3D and having to learn. I had something completely different, but I think it probably triggers some kind of reaction in my brain of looking at the world with a different approach than the mainstream approach. But I was very good from day one. Basically, the first day I was confronted with math in primary school, but everything has been easy from the first day in primary school to the end of high school. Never having to work, always being at the top of the class and everything. Now, when I went to higher education, I was still very good, but I met some people, especially one guy who was incredibly bright. Like he went on to get a gold medal at the International Math Olympiads. That's a very high proof point when you're young. And I was amazed. I could not understand how it was physically possible. The guy was sleeping at the back of a class. He was never listening. He looked like he was on drugs or something. He was not, but he had that very strange gaze. And he has like the best grade all the time. Every problem he could solve instantly. You ask him a question, he closes his eyes, finds the answer. That was like magic. It was probably the first time in my, when you're a kid, many things look like supernatural. When you grow up, it's kind of disappeared. And like all of a sudden, like that supernatural incursion again in my life. And I think that made me very curious. So I had this positive feedback of being myself quite good, but still there was something I did not understand at all.
Maybe we can just jump around a little bit and we'll come back to things. But you recently published your first piece on Substack. What was the catalyst for that, just out of curiosity?
Many readers recommended that I do that. And I started using, I've been on Twitter for a while, but I was not really using it. I started using it this summer. I did a couple of threads, including one on the nature nurture debate for math, and got like 1 million views. That was absolutely crazy, like thousands of reactions, completely crazy. And I realized that it's essential when you publish a book that touches many topics that are hot topic for society in general. It's very important to do the kind of after sale care of your message. You have to explain why you're saying that. You have to document, to justify, to advertise, to reframe, to articulate. You have to do all that. And I started doing that on Twitter when I'm seeing the limitations. And there's of course all the issues with the way the platform is changing and many people are leaving. So I just in the past few months I saw that basically the same kind of message was getting like 5x less views. That was quite obvious that there was something dying there. There's also the fact that you cannot really link any outside content, which is crazy. I mean, you want to create free speech, but you're free to only have speech that cannot be backed by facts. It's kind of crazy. So I tried to see what I could do, and Substack felt like a natural way to go. Trying that, it actually changed my mind. Like I posted my first piece like 2 weeks ago. Next one is going to be published soon, probably before your podcast is even ready online. But it's clear that there is a sweet spot between the social media immediacy and contact and the more long form aspect. And I think for a writer, it's very good. It's a way to experiment with ideas. And for me, my book was written in French, but I was tempted to write it in English, not yet ready. And I think that Substack might be a kind of stepping stone for me to transition to writing in English. Maybe we'll see.
You write very well in English, so I would say go for it. And I find Twitter to be not very stimulating. It's mostly people talking at other people. It seems like you have a wonderful. There are people that break that mold. I think you will enjoy Substack. I think your first piece was excellent.
So let me return the question. Why did you start posting on Substack? What was the trigger for you?
Oh, well, I live in Orange County, California, which is a beautiful place to live. Not the most intellectually stimulating place as far as just, access to interesting people. And so I've always heard that if you post your stuff online, that interesting people will find you and you will be able to have more of these connections. And so really, I'm a dad, I have a full-time job, and this is just kind of my hobby, and kind of, I read, and I like to talk to interesting people about interesting things. And so, before I just randomly email people and be like, hey, you want to have a conversation? I figured I'd put my thoughts out there on Substack, what I'm reading, what I'm thinking about. And lo and behold, you found me. Yeah, it worked, right? So the magic of the internet strikes again. And so yeah, I really just wanted to have interesting conversations with interesting people. So this was been a wonderful occurrence. Next, somewhere down the line, I'm going to corner Nassim Taleb and get him to come have a conversation with me. I'm rereading his entire Inserto at the moment, which is again changed my whole perspective on math and how it could be useful and why we should pay attention to it, essentially. But yeah, so I'm assuming you're familiar with Taleb's writing.
Oh yeah.
As a mathematician, what is your take on it? Have you read his books, or are you just familiar with the ideas?
So I read, I think I read Fooled by Randomness and Black Swan. That was the two ones that were. I like to read the first major book by an author, because very often you get the same idea that's going to be repeated afterwards.
Yeah.
I, from my viewpoint, that's interesting because I'm probably much more of a mathematician than he is.
Yeah, for sure. He would admit that. Yeah, he doesn't even want to be called a mathematician.
Yeah, and 1 foot into mathematics. I would call him a thinker. It's kind of old style, a bit of a polymath, interested in many things. But I think what he has that really strikes me is his ability to create concepts that will stick and that people will actually use, which is fairly rare. I mean, creating expressions like Black Swan, that's impressive. I mean, you're basically reprogramming the minds of so many people at the same time, and they may not even realize that it's coming from you. See, they don't know you, but still, and I think it's something. I'm coming from pure academia, like the true ivory tower. I was doing research in pure mathematics on things like there were maybe like 20 people on Earth being able to understand a bit of what I was doing. It was completely crazy, very, very dry in a way, from a human standpoint. And I've always found that very frustrating. And I've always thought that, I value intellectual creation a lot, but it has to be impactful. And it's not just through technology, it's about changing the minds of people. And if you don't do that, then you don't really matter. And I think is a perfect example of someone who succeeded at creating some work that sticks. And this is the most impressive thing and the most valuable thing to do. So that's why I'm actually very much impressed.
Yeah, I have his dynamic hedging book back here, which is way out of my league, but I bought it just because I was curious to see what kind of information was in it. But yeah, his general audience books I appreciate very much, as much as I appreciate yours. So what made you write I guess that you answered that question, to have a broader impact with a larger audience.
No, I became a mathematician because there was something really weird about math, and it intrigued me. I was good, So of course you get some traction and you get sucked into math because you're very good at math. But there's also that kind of mystery about what is reality, what is truth, how does the human brain function. Is something very deep, something probably deserving to be called a philosophical interest. My interest in math was very strong, very, very genuine, but I did not really want to become a mathematician. I was much more interested in writing and reading. And so it's kind of the completion of a very long journey. It's like I made a very big trip that I thought would take me, short time. And it took me years and years and years. And coming back from that gigantic trip, probably, there are things I want to write about. And it was already contained in my project to do mathematics, the idea that there was something to bring and to take outside of mathematics and to bring back into the mainstream.
I remember you saying in the book, I think somewhere, maybe it's in your article, it took you 20 years to write this, or you've been working on this for 20 years. I heard Nassim Taleb in a podcast interview say something similar, like, I thought about these ideas for 20 years before I wrote them down, essentially, and then it took me a few years to write them down. And so is there something mathematically minded where things just take a long time to process and
Well, I think there are multiple. It's a very important idea, and that's what I think it's important to say that publicly, because people probably right now have ideas, they're confused about something, they're thinking it's weird, they don't know if they're just stupid or crazy, or whether they have an original idea. When you have something original that you saw something, you have an angle that's not been written, not been explained, it's very hard to put words to. And when I say very hard, it's very hard. It's like 20 years. And you feel completely stupid. Like you try to. So when I was writing the book, I was finding many examples of files, like 3 lines on the file, and over a period of 20 years, and always the same idea. And now with the book written, I can recognize things. I even like when the book was finished, I finally found a file I had lost, but I got a copy somewhere in my outbox because I'd sent it as an attachment before losing it. And that was the notes from a series of lecture I gave almost 20 years ago. And it was like 30 pages of notes. And there were actual sentences that reappeared in the book 20 years after that. That was completely crazy.
That is crazy. I love that, though. Yeah, I mean,
but why is it so important? Because it's so easy to get discouraged. So if you don't testify that this is really the way creation works, then you don't give the right encouragement for people who are currently lost in trying to say something that they just cannot say because it's too early. It's not just you; it's the people around you who are not ready to listen. So the structure is not available. It's like when you want to create a new business, but the tech is not ready for that. It's something of that nature. I think the society was not ready, and I was not ready to frame it that way.
Yeah, I think the business analogy is really good. Even if the tech is not ready, if you don't have a compelling story to tell, if you don't have a brand, if you don't have a vision that you can articulate well across many different platforms, I think your odds of success go down. And I think it just takes, and really it's not about doing it all at once and doing it quickly. It's about saying, okay, it's going to take me 20 years to start a business, realistically, from the seed of the idea all the way to it becoming a viable revenue producing business. Realistically, it'll take you about 20 years. So get started now, right? As opposed to waiting. And I think that with any original idea or anytime you're trying to bring something ephemeral into reality, it takes significantly longer than it appears on looking at other people's success. And also just in general, I think we have this strange time scale for or expectation of the time scale for how long things take to either be good at or be communicable at scale, right? Let's talk about Rene Descartes. And so Discourse on Method, I have it sitting here somewhere, tiny little pamphlet of a book. If I hadn't read your interpretation of it, I would have I don't know what I would have thought of it, but I wouldn't have been able to read it without the encouragement from your book. So I appreciate that. You claim that he's misread. In what ways do you think he's misread? And I think I mentioned earlier that Taleb compared him and Montaigne. Montaigne, I'm a big fan of. I've been reading his essays for years now, and so I never made the connection between the two of them for whatever reason. But how is Descartes misread? And I suppose your interpretation of him seems more aligned with what Taleb was referring to about Montaigne, and
Yeah.
so
So
pick that apart a little bit.
he's misread, and he's partly responsible for that. He made a major mistake. And actually, there was this book from maybe 20 years ago called Descartes' Error by some guy named Damasio, who's a neuroscientist, who says basically that Descartes' dualism, the idea that the mind is disconnected from the brain, is a major mistake.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. I think Descartes got that completely wrong. But it was impossible for him to get it right. If you think that the solution to the enigma is rooted in neuroplasticity, that was impossible to frame that in the 17th century. You just did not have the understanding of the inner workings of the human body. I remember that in another writing, Descartes says that he thinks the heart is a kind of furnace or boiler or something.
Yeah.
They were there,
Yeah.
so it didn't make any sense. So he's been misread and interpreted as a guy who's been advocating a very scholarly method in terms of writing things down, being precise, being rigorous, whereas he keeps speaking about the inner experience. I mean, he defines truth as something that is clear and distinct, which, looking from the 21st century, looks like a neurological definition of truth, which is kind of bizarre. It's a very subjective thing. So he was actually a very human person, focused on his subjectivity against external systems that would be imposed upon you. So that he was very innovative on that. He's basically, I think people, for example, don't realize that Freud is a direct descendant of Descartes. This idea that what happens in your brain is in your mind, in your thoughts, in your dreams is important. He's talking about his dreams. He was inspired by his dreams. So he's a very human person, rooted in intuition and talking about the inner experience and talking about life. He wants to be alive. He's very much alive, and he's been interpreted as someone who's on the side of death, like everything must be written down in details. That's probably because what he was talking about was too hard to explain at the time. So when you look at someone from the 17th century, he's going to get to be wrong on some number of things. And I think that Taleb, for good reason, from his own perspective, dislikes where Descartes was wrong. And probably because it's a bit hidden and you have to approach that with a certain angle to see it, he's not aware of where Descartes was innovative and probably closer to his own way of thinking. And there's another thing, which is the personal ethos. And I think Montaigne, as a person, resembles Taleb much more. Is someone who's into arguing with people. For example, Taleb he likes fighting. So there's something about personality that he feels much at home with. Montaigne, I can understand.
I mean, Montaigne was also like locked himself in a castle for the last 30 years of his life or something, right? So I mean, he was battling with his own thoughts and intuition most of the time, right? Through letters and through his essays. But fascinating historical figures either way. So just a little backstory here for you. So I think I mentioned I was born and raised Catholic. I've, as any good teenager would, I've kind of rejected that through my teens and 20s, and I've kind of looking for truth, looking for meaning, looking for what to tell your kids, as they're growing up about the world. at some point, if you're a thinking person, you have to go down this rabbit hole of Christianity. It's such a giant meme and cultural thing that's a part of everybody's life at this point. So I've noticed across a lot of the references, there's a Catholic or Christian kind of backing to a lot of these mathematicians. So Abelard, Occam, Descartes, all Catholic from my understanding, and I'm going to butcher Grothendieck or Grothen. How do you pronounce it?
Grothendieck, but it's a German name.
Grothendieck was raised by a Lutheran pastor. So there's just many links to Christianity. I guess you just be totally random. I'm just picking this out based on my reading. But do you think that there's a link between mathematical discovery and just kind of having the openness of mind, perhaps, to religion and belief and spirituality, that being kind of a force multiplier for mathematical discovery or thinking?
So I think that the coincidences you're spotting are probably just coincidence, and I'm going to explain why. But the statement you're making, there's something about mystical dimension of math that is a meaningful pattern in the story. So let me first kind of discount a bit the coincidences, because it's basically I'm rooting this story in ancient thinkers and writers, and I personally feel very close to European medieval philosophy. So Abelard is a hero of mine. Actually, I named my second son Abelard, so it tells a lot how much I admire this guy. And if you were an intellectual in the 12th century, you had to be Catholic. That's not even a discussion. He ran into a bit of trouble with the church on many issues. Some of his books were kind of banned. Descartes was concerned that the same thing would happen to him, on a different century, like 5 centuries later. But he was very concerned about what had just happened to Galileo, and he tried to be, he went to the Netherlands because it was not a Catholic country, and he would not be victim of whatever persecutions. It was risky to say things challenging the state of nature at the time. So I think for these guys, they were Catholic, but by default, and may actually be. It's not clear what Descartes was really thinking. Some people say he was kind of a closeted atheist, that he couldn't say that, and he went as close as he could to saying that. Others think that he was really a mystic, and I do think he was a mystic, actually, in a way, but not in a traditional Catholic way, kind of unusual way. Now, Grothendieck is probably more interesting for the pattern you're pointing, because not necessarily because of his education, that was half this Lutheran thing, and the other half was his biological parents who were kind of anarchist revolutionaries, not Christian at all. So he has a kind of dual influence. But he was a very big mystic. He wrote very unusual, and I'm being polite when I say that. There is rants for thousands of pages where he thinks that God is whispering to his ears. It's very weird, I would say. The intensity of mysticism is very weird. And this thing is something that you spotted in other authors like Cantor and so many who actually associate their experiences of mathematics with something, connecting them with God. And I have a theory here, which is a very personal theory. I've never read it anywhere, but let me try to state it, because I think it's quite interesting. There is this idea that religion is coming from a need to explain natural phenomena. Like in the ancient times, there was a god of thunder and a god of flood and a god of whatever, a god of harvest. And I think there's something in math that you experience that is a very strange natural phenomenon that takes place within your brain. Like something about the experience of understanding something, the experience of feeling clarity and language kind of align in a very powerful way. It's a very emotional thing and it's something that's been impossible to explain. Like until I would say the past 20 years, maybe it was completely impossible to explain what was taking place from a neurological standpoint. So it was kind of natural to call that thing God. So, disclaimer, I'm personally an atheist, so I'm saying that in a way that doesn't include the reality of God. But of course, you're free to interpret the same exact phenomenon as a manifestation of God. That's a different interpretation of something that is an objective experience, something that happens in our brains when we do that, which is fascinating and a very, very powerful element of their lives. So all of them describe moments where they have this kind of epiphanies, like Descartes' dreams, when he basically invents modern rationality because the spirit of God descends upon him, spirit of truth, whatever.
Gives him a dictionary.
Dream of a dictionary. And Pascal, a few years after that, we describe a certain night where a certain epiphany, and it's always like that. I mean, they all tell the same thing. It's they describe being the creative process and the way when you feel stuck on certain problems and you iterate, at some point there's clarity coming to you and you see the world differently, like almost instantly.
For whatever reason, this thought just comes to mind, but God, or the proverbial God, seems to be in creation of some sort. And so when you're creating these mathematical truths, things that are deeply true, perhaps, I don't know, there's maybe an overwhelming sense of that phenomenon.
You're creating language at the same time, which is certain accounts of the creation of the world. You start with language. It's so this experience of being, to touching the moment where new words appear that mean things that you could not express before is very hard to account for if you don't have a strong you need very powerful explanation for that. So if you don't have neuroplasticity, you probably need God to explain it.
So another one of my favorite quotes from the essay is the one that says the rules of the game of truth. Imaginary doesn't mean arbitrary. The rules of the game of truth aren't random, and they might actually be the greatest invention in history. When we follow these rules, our mental images consolidate and crystallize into a coherent worldview that is insanely powerful. I want to know more about that, because that sounds exciting and that sounds like fun. What is this game of truth?
So this brings us back to Abelard and conceptualism, which is the theme of the essay, the Substack essay that you're quoting. So I think we need to start from there, because otherwise it's very hard to understand what this story is about. So basically it's about the meaning of words in language and the meaning of concept. When you think of something like truth or beauty or being around, these things are called universals. And the question is, do they exist? Or are they conventions, like words, empty words? And we put meaning, but there's not really meaning in them. So that's very old debate that goes back to the ancient times. It was very active in the 12th century. And in the 12th century, there was this new way to articulate the tension between these two viewpoints through what Abelard created, that is now called conceptualism, which is also what so Abelard is from the French-speaking world, but there is William of Ockham, who is more famous in the English-speaking part of the world, who is basically influenced by Abelard. And they said this concept they created by a cognition, which I think is the modern solution to a question. And in a way, deep learning is a way to connect that to something we can experiment with. Now, if you're a conceptualist, which I am, you have this very strange for the people who are not conceptualists. It's not strange for me, because
hang on, what is a conceptualist? Yeah, explain conceptualist real quick.
Is that basically the meaning of stuff is something that the meaning of words is a cognitive phenomenon. It's not something that is, so the words are like ink on a page or vibration of sound. This is like There's no meaning in that. You create meaning. Where does the meaning lie? Is it something that's coming from the sky, or is it something that is created by your brain? And conceptualism is a way to it basically claims that meaning is a psychological phenomenon. It's something that takes place in your brain. So you have the symbol, something that is outside of you, and you attribute meaning to that symbol. And what is meaning in your brain? Well, your brain is a kind of very complex connectome of like billions and billions of stuff and connection and all that. So meaning is it's just connection between stuff. There is no absolute meaning. It's just relative meaning. So our brain functions like that, but before we used language in the same way we're using it, we were a kind of permanent intuitive interaction with the world, like a brain is when there is no language and there is no logic. There is no notion that things are true or false. For things to be true or false, you need to have statements who have meaning and true value, and the true value should be true or false. So what I call the game of truth is, and you should really view that as kind of evolutionary process. We start with a language that's kind of animal language, has some degree of expressivity, but there is not like this hard structure, syntax, grammar, whatever. Notion of true or false is not really there in the same way. You cannot say 2 + 2 = 4 if you don't have a very symbolic language like we have. So when you start thinking that words have a meaning, that meaning is potentially stable over time. So which means you assume that it's no longer human, but you assume that it's godly in a way. True value that is binary, it's true or false. Which is, again, not something that's coming with natural language originally. When you start to do that, you play a certain game. You interact with statements in a way that you make them characters of a big story, which is argumentation, rationality, and all that. But if you're a conceptualist like me, there is something arbitrary in that. Like, meaning doesn't really exist. Truth is never absolute. So why are you doing that? You're still doing that. It's a fact that we're doing that. It's part of our experience that we play that game. My interpretation of that is that this game of making as if the meaning of words was very precise and stable over time, as if statements had an ambiguous semantic and an absolute true value, and you could play Lego with that. From a neurological standpoint, if you play that game, it's going to work great in your brain. It's going to make your cognition more effective. And there is a pathway to do that is when you start to play that game, you can make reasonings. And these reasonings, they create new statements out of things that you perceptually believe are true. You can create more statements that were not in your immediate perception, but are considered to be true because you proved them in a way. Now, if you imagine these statements, let's say you imagine that in 10 years the climate would be hotter. It's very far-fetching in a way, to imagine that. Then this imagination becomes part of your experience. So you're basically learning things about reality that were not directly perceived by reality. So in a way, it's arbitrary. In a way, it's a convention. But in another way, it's an actual activity of your brain that basically increases the size of your training set of things that you consider to be true in a way that is proven to be effective. So this is why it's both a game, it's not arbitrary, and it's a breakthrough. You can view it almost as an evolutionary breakthrough. And it's probably what enables us to spend our time in abstraction like we do right now. We're just talking to each other. So basically, we're not learning from reality. We're just manipulating symbols in a very strange way. Why do we do that? Well, because we enjoy it, but because we enjoy it because it creates value for us. How does it create value? If you think of it from a machine learning standpoint, I'm adding right now to your training set a number of statements of images that's going to influence your learning. If I do it randomly, it's going to be bad learning, bad training data for you. But if I do it rationally, even though I can't really prove that rationality aligns with reality, it makes your learning more aligned with reality. And this is the beauty of the game. Does it make sense? It's the first time, basically, it's the first time that I'm trying to explain that in details in a conversation that's recorded. So it's quite ambitious what I'm trying to do. So I'm very sincerely asking if it makes sense.
I think it does. And so my first jump, and this might be a big jump, but I want to, consciousness is where I go. So like you're explaining consciousness essentially, or your interpretation of consciousness. You can build your house of knowledge on a foundation of sand, or you can build it on these concrete blocks of truth, right? And that's what you're talking about, is the building your knowledge on the truest things. I guess what I would like to know is, like, how do you, so my interpretation of this is that you have an idea, or you come up with some sort of thought or idea or language that doesn't exist yet. You test that in reality, and based off of that feedback, you're either refining or the block that you're building, or you're scrapping it and starting over again.
Okay, so this is where actually Descartes got wrong. So it's probably tricky. If he got wrong on that, it means that it's really tricky. When you do mathematics, you start with, like, you say you do geometry, Euclidean geometry, so basically you have lines, you have intersections, you have circles, and you construct things, triangles, shapes, whatever. You start from a number of axioms, things that you assume to be true, and you create new things that within that game of truth are also true. As you proceed along that journey of creating new truths, you also reprogram your brain, because it becomes intuitively obvious to you that these things are correct. Not on day one, but as you progress, you gradually find them more and more intuitive. This is mathematics. It doesn't talk about the real world. It just talks about the construction in your head. Now, if you do the same, if you copy-paste that approach and use it for reality, you're going to start from things that you observe on reality that are true, and you're going to play that logical game of deduction, and you create new statements. And this is the example I give in my book, is the chicken and egg problem. Like, you know that a chicken is born from an egg, and an egg is laid by a chicken. So if you play that game, you're absolutely sure that chickens predated the Big Bang, because it's impossible to have chicken zero in that game. So obviously it doesn't work, So this is the nuance between mathematics and reality. And this is what Descartes got wrong. He thought that the foundations were concrete, rock. He did not use the word concrete, but it was more rock. Whereas it's actually, you're building a very rigid structure, but it's still on sand, because when you say a chicken is born out of an egg, it's not exactly true. It's like almost true, almost true within a certain range of experiences. And this is exactly what Wittgenstein described as being the limits of language. So basically, the language does not have a property. The real language of humans, talking about the world, talking about what we see and experience every day, does not satisfy the condition for rationality to work. And rationality does not really work at predicting the future. This is why we need experimental science. So when you do science, you start from things that are true, you make some reasoning, you make a conclusion that this thing should be true, but it's not true. You have to check it against reality. You have to validate your theory. This is proper in a way, You have to make sure that what you've predicted about the future is going to be not exactly correct, but reasonably correct, sufficiently correct for your theory to make sense.
Right. Or sufficiently correct to advance us
exactly
further toward an absolute.
So it's both making science effective in terms of its predictive power, and making it credible in terms of its theoretical interpretation of the world. And these two things progress hand in hand. But it's never perfect. You don't have a perfect fit. Descartes thought it was a perfect thing. So he thought that chicken is born out of an egg, and that's perfectly correct, and he can make all reasoning he wants with that, which doesn't work.
Right.
But the proof is science works, not in this absolute way, but in a pragmatic way of being useful to building technology that works. So even though there's no reason from a transcendent standpoint for this thing to work, it does work quite well in a very pragmatic way. And this is quite strange in a way. And the explanation could be that mathematics is the language of the universe. That's this kind of 17th century interpretation, which I don't believe is, I don't subscribe to that interpretation. My interpretation is that this game of truth thing that we play when we make rational reasoning is virtuous from a neuronal standpoint.
I think I agree with that statement, that it's virtuous. Yeah. I highlighted this in your book, and this, there's a lot of fear or uneasiness or I don't know, with large language models and sentience and AI taking over the world and all this kind of stuff. And a sentence in your book: your intuition will always be more powerful and better informed than most sophisticated language-based reasonings. To me, that kind of confirmed what I intuitively felt, perhaps just interacting with the large language models. It's that we will likely always have an upper hand in some regard, at least in creativity or originality, or at least from a truth-seeking perspective, because their foundations are built on the best of what we've given them up to this point, and so they will never necessarily be able to make those leaps from one thing to another. But am I wrong in thinking that?
I don't know. You may be right, you may be wrong. I don't have a definite answer on that. And I think there's an important nuance when you compare what I've been saying about the way we use language when we make reasonings in language, which is limited. It's basically, the kind of system two thinking of Kahneman. It's kind of rigorous thinking. This is not what LLMs do. What LLMs do is to make intuitive reasoning with language. So they learn from language. They learn from basically all the utterances that have existed in the history of humankind. It's basically the training set in a very caricature way. So they learn from what we've said, but they do not learn in a logical way. They learn in a very intuitive way. So to predict what is going to be the right reply to whatever chat conversation you start with them. And this is why they're kind of experts in bullshitting in all possible ways, because they always find like the best, most credible answers, most credible thing to reply to a question, even if it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But I think they're a different kind of intelligence. They are smarter than we are and stupider than we are at the same time. So because they learn from, I just think about the number of things that the number of lines you've read in your life is like several orders of magnitude less than what they learn. So you learn much less from language, but you learn much more from sensory experience. So that's the Yann Lequin objection to LLM, saying, when I push that table, there is a glass on the table. How do you know from language that the glass is going to be moving with the table? It's never been. There is a big irony in everything. He says it's not in any text in the literature, in the training set. The thing is, that conference where he said that is in the training set. So a smart LLM will be able to realize that Yann Lequin once said that if there's a glass on the table, so you don't really know what has been said and what you can infer from what's been said. So they kind of hybrids between intuitive and language in a crazy way. And so I don't know the limits of that thing.
Okay. Are you working on a machine learning project or a
no, not right now. I think it's too active for my taste. I like to do things where I think life is short. I've been doing mathematics. I've been an entrepreneur. I've been writing books. My life is limited. So I think the best use of my time is to do something where I'm the only person on earth able to do that very specific tiny thing on my side. And machine learning is definitely not like that. It's like a gold rush, and it's for different kinds of personalities. People who like managing very complex projects. I just don't want to do that right now.
I can relate to that sentiment very, very much. Let's talk a little bit about dream journaling. You mentioned this in your book. This is something that you deem as a skill or that you can get better at. At least in my interpretation of what you wrote. I don't dream personally on a regular basis. I have some strange reoccurring dreams, and occasionally if I don't sleep well at night and I'm in kind of like a lighter, sleep, I'll remember what I dreamed. Always meaningless or strange and just bizarre. But in the book, you describe it as something you do before you go to bed. You put a thought into your head and you kind of let it churn through the night, and you'll wake up and write something down, or you'll have these things, and you even describe it as exhausting, which I could imagine it would be, because I suspect that the depth of sleep is probably not very, very significant if you're having these kind of lucid dreams all the time. But just take me through what maybe your nighttime routine is, or why you started experimenting with that, and how that came about. Like what was the inspiration
So first I should be transparent that I basically quit practicing dream journaling because I think I still dream exactly the same, because I think we all dream, but I don't remember my dreams with the clarity I used to since I gave dream journaling. And it's a very deep thing. It was not intentional, it's just that my life has been too disrupted, especially by the fact that I have these kids. This night I was woken up like 3 times by my kids. It's not like that all the time, but it was a very bad night from that perspective. And just trying to do any structured pattern around your sleep when you have young kids at home, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for me. I started doing that as a teenager. I think because I had dreams that I found interesting and weird, and I was not interested in interpreting them. I never really was.
Yeah.
I was interested in expressing them because I don't know. I just find it's an incredible exercise. I just said in the previous reply that I want to do things that I'm the only person on earth to be able to do, and telling you a dream, you're the only one who knows the dream. And what you saw is sometimes very, very precise, very specific, and there is a situation and there is a feeling, and you don't really, it's easy to say, I dreamt I was taking the subway and I was late, I kind of feel that happens. But sometimes there is a very strange arrangement of your position in the space, with respect to what you try to achieve, or this object has a very strange shape or smell or something. There's something that is very experienced in a very deep emotional way, and you don't know what to say. And for me, the reason why, for example, I write is because there are things in my head that I kind of feel in a very intense way, and I don't know how to say that. So I just try to say it, and dream is a perfect example of that. What I learned after that is that skill of trying to transcribe very evanescent perceptions in your brain into words and stories and things that make sense and people can read and react to is actually a very universal skill that is at the root of mathematics. Basically, when you want to write down a proof, when I say, can a line intersect a circle in more than 2 points? The answer is no, but when I ask that question, you probably have kind of a line sweeping across the circle in your brain. So you convince yourself that it's true, but why? Can you explain that with a proof, which is writing it down? Stop having that mental cartoon and just try to write it down. So this is the hardest part of math. And some people think that there is the logical math, which is the written proof, and there is intuition that is not important. No. The written math is transcription of the thing that takes place in your brain. So learning that back and forth, imagining starting from words, imagining it, starting from images, writing them down is what you have to do all the time when you do that. You have to do that back and forth. Writing dreams is that. And it's also the perfect school for writing fiction or non-fiction. How do you, there's a world that has thousands and billions of dimensions, and how do you turn that into two sentences?
I think it's an incredibly broad. I think it has an incredibly broad application, like you said. I don't think it's just math, but it's an interesting connection point that you were able to make intuitively or stumble across. I think.
And what can you remove? There's too much in your dream. That's the crazy thing about dream. There's too much. How do you make it very short but capture the essential?
So an example or a historical event that comes to mind is Da Vinci and Pacioli. I think it's Pacioli, right? So Da Vinci illustrated Pacioli's treatise on geometry, I think, and this is off of memory, so I could probably it. But anyways, your book reminded me of it in a lot of ways because you had those geometric shapes where you were saying it's hard to imagine, and it was this, you can input the technical term for the shape, but they're these wild shapes, right? And hundreds of years ago, Da Vinci was creating these forms that I think Pacioli had described, and Da Vinci was drawing them and making them more accessible, I guess, right? And so this kind of dynamic between either if you can do both, I think that's extremely powerful, but this dynamic between working with somebody that can help you articulate or help you extract out of your brain or out of language and make it into a vision, something visual is extremely helpful. So going back and forth between the two states of saying like, okay, you can visualize this, now can you write it down and prove it? And then if you can write it down and prove it, can you also visualize, create some visual representation of it? I'm fascinated by that back and forth that happens. Do you have any?
Yeah, it's fascinating, and the most fascinating for me is that if you do it well, it sticks, and it creates the imagery in the brains of other people. And right. If you go back to Descartes again, I mean, this just thing that he saw that you could convert geometrical problem into algebraic problem by putting coordinates.
Right.
Like a point in the plane as x and y. He invented that. And before that, there's like two different worlds. There was like shapes, geometry, only lines, circles, points, but no numbers. And then there was algebra, x, y, numbers, equations, and all that. And like, I think when you had that idea, it probably was in a dreamy state. That you can like, what's crazy. It's so easy for us now. And everybody understands that. When I say everybody can understand that, at some point it was kind of advanced research, completely crazy, and people thought he was Einstein for inventing that. But now we all get that. It's so obvious, X and Y. Come on, everybody gets that. So by finding words to describe this situation that was unthinkable before him, he ended up creating, not him, because at his time it was still a research level, and then it went into something simpler and reframed, clarified, simplified, and at some point it became some like primary school thing. And this is really the story of human thought. It's not a joke. It seems completely crazy. So you see that example of creating something that is kind of godlike. I mean, we invented something that simplifies our ability to describe the world.
Real quick, I just want to go back. So Euclid and Euclid's geometry, he has a concept, pons asinorum, which is the bridge of asses, and it basically the point at which they separate the wheat from the chaff when you're learning geometry, and it's the first complex geometric concept, I guess, in Euclid's treatise. And basically, if you could pass,
which concept did you refer to?
I don't. Let me see if I can look it up real quick. So it's in Proposition 5, Book 1 in Euclid's Elements. I don't know what it is, but it's been useful for me to think of things as like there is a bridge of asses, essentially, or pons asinorum in all things, right? There is a point where you're going to run into something that is difficult, and how long do you need to persist, I suppose, right? And so I don't know. I wasn't sure. I just had something you said reminded me of Euclid, and that concept. But is that something that you're familiar with, or did you just breeze through Proposition
I
5,
think
Book
there are
1?
many situations like that, and it's not one. Like there are multiples. You can get stuck at different ways, and then you get stuck again. There are like well-known points where it's crazy. For me, in my book, I take the example of using letters instead of numbers, which was hard for me. That was maybe the only thing that was hard for me in high school.
Yeah.
And I know many people who kind of gave up math at that point because they did not persist for long enough. It's a very difficult question, actually. How long should you persist? And I don't think there is a prepackaged answer to that question. It depends on what you want to do. But I think there is probably a right way to frame the question, which is not that common. And I do think that's, for me, if I want to look at what's really a different guiding rule that I have that is not common, is I never think of it in terms of, do I have a capability to understand that? Because I think I have, and we all have a capability to do it. Doesn't mean we're going to do it. And that's interesting. So the real question is not, could I potentially do it? Yes. But will I do it? And will I do it is more like, am I on a trajectory where I'm going to have a reasonable chance of doing it, and it's going to bring me reasonable value, and it's worth doing that. If you look at businesses, it's always like that. Of course, you can pivot and you can enter a new market. You can always try. And with enough resources, you can always do it. The question is it a wise thing to do or not? So it's more about, it's not thinking in terms of what is your limit, but what is the right thing to do. And this question is very hard to ask in generality. You have to understand it in context. You have to take advice from people who know it. I would say, in general, it's easier than it looks, and you have to persist a bit more than what you thought.
This also reminds me of, so are you familiar with the Roger Bannister effect?
No, I don't know that one.
Roger Bannister was the first person to run a 4-minute mile.
Okay.
And once he did it, many other people did it in succession, basically, like within a couple of weeks, right? Are there things like that in math that exist where
there are really
math is like the Roger Bannister effect just happening over and over again, and that's how mathematics advances?
Yeah, so it's very common that when someone proves a theorem, like there's another person proving that theorem. So there are many reasons for that. One is it comes at a certain point in time where there is some concept that has been invented and took a certain while to get understood, but once you realize that, it crystallizes. For like Leibniz and Newton invented basically calculus at the same time, independently.
Yeah,
it looks like they really did it independently. There is some controversy about ones stealing the ideas, but I really think that they got that independently. But there's another thing is sometimes when you hear that the theorem is proven, then you say, oh, so it can be proven, so maybe I can prove it too, and then you do it. And actually, when I wrote a long thread on Twitter about prove a certain theorem that was solving a very old conjecture, one day or maybe like 49 days, because it took me like 49 days to work out the proof. But the starting point is I woke up in the morning thinking, hey, what would happen if someone else does that? So it kind of was a trigger. So I guess it was about realizing that it was actually possible to solve that problem that used to be an unsolvable problem. And yeah, so there is a beautiful phrase by Pierre Deligne, who is one of possibly the mathematician that I admire the most, the most famous student of Grothendieck. So Deligne said, and I checked with him that whether that quote was correct. I saw that quote on the internet. It's too beautiful to be true. I have to email him to make sure that it's really correct. He said, in mathematics, all problems are psychological, which is, I mean, if he wasn't Pierre Deligne, you would think it's a joke, it's provocative, it's nonsense. but he's possibly, it's like on the top 5 mathematicians on the world right now. And he's honest in what he says. That it's not a provocation. He's really sincere.
Yeah, I think you have to look at Donald Hoffman's work on consciousness. I think you'll enjoy it. All right, a couple more here. Another quote. So, as an imaginary activity, math is a driver of neuroplasticity. This explains the indisputable Platonic feel of math. When we spend enough time imagining mathematical abstractions, we end up perceiving them as if they really existed. And to me, and maybe you can get me on the right track here. This could be a potentially dangerous idea, and maybe this gets back to your like Unabomber example in the book, right? When you start to perceive things as reality that are not necessarily reality, and you've essentially convinced yourself that you perceive these things and that they are true. The antidote to that is doubt, right? And you have to always have a healthy amount of doubt in what you're basing your reality on. I think. Yeah. But just talk a little bit about that and about perception and how these things work. Because I mean, you could argue that like a lot of people who are very religious, they maybe they pray or they meditate or they go to their church and they essentially by doing these imaginary activities, they become real or they have some perception of them that maybe others don't if they don't do those practices, right?
Yeah, so that's interesting because you actually at the end of your question you actually said what I was about to say by connecting it to the question before about mathematical truth, religious belief, presence of God, and the way it's been interpreted historically. So I think that Descartes was a very sincere dualist, and he came to the conclusion that these very, very bizarre things where his ideas was becoming clearer and clearer, and he was thinking and he was becoming like super smart. He was thinking that it was the presence of God planted by creation in his brain as the seed of truth that he was uncovering through that kind of meditative process. That's not my interpretation. My interpretation is that the neurological experience of clarity magically appearing, framed in a beautiful, luminous way of, creating a concept that makes sense and things become obvious because you've seen it. And this is property of a brain. But this experience is a very disturbing one when you experience it. So you have to be very careful about realizing that you got there through meditation. And this is where Unabomber got it wrong. He wrote this manifesto that was, as Bill Thurston was asked by the FBI to say, is it credible that it's really written by a mathematician? He said, yeah, it looks like it's written by, because it's a kind of point A, point B, and you play Lego with truth, which is a very mathematical way of thinking. When you do that again and again and again, it becomes clear, it looks obvious, but you're doing math. You're not doing science. Science is something that needs to be validated by experience.
Falsifiable, yeah.
Falsifiable. Well, it's always, it's not just that it has to be falsifiable. You have to be in the mindset of being willing to falsify it.
Correct.
So yeah. you may be doing a very interesting theory, and it's always this thing with people who are paranoid. Very often they're saying smart things and they see things that sometimes correspond to reality, but they don't do the final falsifiability test. They're in a mindset where they think it's true, therefore it's true, which is where it gets dangerous. So I think it's dangerous, and it's been documented to be dangerous historically for mathematicians to get carried away by the fact that in mathematics, when you think it's true, it's actually true because you've constructed it and proved it. It's mathematics,
right?
But it doesn't work that same way. And it's what I'm saying is, normal people who don't do math and who are not paranoid, everybody knows that reasoning is not correct until it's confronted with reality, and everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Mike Tyson quote. It's something like that. But when you do mathematics, nobody tells you that you should be careful of that. It goes without saying, but it's better being said. And I do think that the frequency with which some famous mathematicians got into very dangerous mental states. I mean, you can think Unabomber, you can think John Nash, the history of mathematics littered with these examples. There's really an insane frequency of that, because this experience of discovering truth by meditation and taking it for granted is so strong that it can be dangerous. And I think it's the same thing that is going on with fanatism in a way. So there's I think a danger to not being myself religious. It's hard for me to say it right, but I do think that probably if you're religious, it's dangerous to overestimate how close you can get to God through meditation and prayer. Probably there's something of that nature,
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that. These are just things that I was thinking of as I was reading certain things concurrently. So I appreciate you humoring me and taking a stab at those. We can go a little less deep here, and just some practical, tactical questions for you. As a parent, as a new-ish parent, and two parents that don't consider themselves mathematically minded necessarily, I would love for my girls to not be constrained by our limitations. What can I do to foster, encourage their interest and curiosity, and show them the importance of mathematics or learning or understanding or sticking with mathematics for maybe longer than they would otherwise?
Gamify it, and don't call that mathematics. So, for example, numbers. So I have my 5-year-old, and my 1-year-old. So
tell me what you do. That would be great.
So what I did with a 5-year-old, and he's very fluent with numbers right now. He's asking me questions like we're talking about something. I said, "What is 8 times 8?" That's a question for a 5-year-old. So it's not too bad. So we got there by playing with the elevator, imagining it could go to -1, -2. What is you're on the third floor. If you remove 5, where do you get? It's kind of always that game. I have that geometry game that is very hard but quite interesting. Is in his bedroom, asking in which direction is the entrance door of the house, where is the school, where is the park, trying to kind of create a mental image of space. These are games, that's interesting. And the other,
let me ask you a question on that real fast. So what is the answer that you're looking for? Are you looking for like north, south, east, west? It's left.
No, pointing it. Like really, where is it? Where is it? It's very concrete.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just points in the
Where
direction.
is the kitchen? Where is the kitchen? When it's in the bedroom, it's a 3D problem, depending, or 2D, depending if you're an apartment or house, but it's still an abstraction problem. And just making them practice that mental imagery. And there is no good or bad answer. You kind of, I think it's there. You can disagree, but just make them practice, make them train, make them walk and run. Do not sit all day long. Make them practice. And the other exercise is telling their dreams. In the morning, did you dream? What did you dream of? What was it? Can you describe it?
I love it. Those are two really good ones that I'm gonna start doing on a regular basis here. Anything else?
That's I have to be very practical. I don't, sometimes I invent more. And there is a beautiful book. In French, it's 1 million points. So I think it exists in many languages. Like 1 million dots. Is on page 1 you have like 1 dot. On page 2 you have 2 dots. Then you have 4. When you have 8. When you have 16. And the power of 2 is a very interesting thing for kids. Because it grows so fast. It's impressive.
We love books in this house, so any book recommendations I will take. So as an adult who wants to perhaps brush up on his skills, what can I be doing because I think another thing that is huge is, if my kids see me doing something, at least in the early stages of life, they will be more interested in it. They're just curious in everything that we do at this point. So what can I be doing to model that behavior and incorporate that into my daily life? Like I go for a run every morning. I would love to have something I do math-minded that is fun, not too challenging, but keeps me sharp-ish. For a normie who's not a mathematician, do you have any recommendations on that?
I must be very honest about that. It's super hard to learn math if you don't have a very clear goal. So learning like kind of academic math, I'm going to learn category theory of differential equation or whatever is, I think it's too hard if you don't have a good professional reason to do that. So what can you do? If you really still want to do something that is about math itself, but for me, the most interesting thing, the only thing I enjoy on the internet is 3 blue, 1 brown. It's just so beautiful. Like the proofs, it's the reasoning, it's the voice, the animation. It's a general public channel, but I can say that every top mathematician that I know is in awe on the quality of it. It's really mathematical thinking at a very deep way. So if you select a couple of videos that you like and try to recreate the mental journey of this thing, it's very good. But this is quite academic in the sense that it's about abstract math. So I think maybe the easiest thing would be about doing more concrete things that are not called mathematics. And the two obvious ones that come to me is programming, Python, try to do a website that does something, you try to do an app that does something. And this can be something that you do with your kids, or program a robot to do something, or whatever, And the other one is maybe chess or simpler games to start with. It's training the same things. It's not training the conceptual side of mathematics. It's training the intuitive reasoning pairing, back and forth between intuition and logic, which is, I don't like chess very much, but as a kid, I liked chess. I gave up chess when I became interested in math, because math is more interesting when you get to the moment where you really learn it. But when you're a kid, chess is possibly the closest you can get to math.
I also have tried to get into chess throughout in several periods of my life, and I'm okay. I'm certainly proficient at it. I find that the fact that there are a finite amount of of moves that you can, like, it's not arbitrary enough to hold my interest for a long period of time. Like,
I agree. I mean, when I was a kid, I had that kind of chess machine that was kind of chess software, but embodied in an actual physical game. And the thing is, it kept beating me all the time, and I was really upset. And one day I was about to beat it, and then it malfunctioned, like almost when I was getting to checkmate, and it drove me mad, and I started hating chess. Then
it's more of a social thing. Like, I enjoy playing chess with people that I want to have a conversation with. It's something nice to do as you're across from somebody. I don't like it. It's not as fun on a computer or a phone. But 3 blue, 1 brown. Okay, I'm familiar with it. I don't read it regularly, so I'll start incorporating that into my media diets. So there's a somewhat, I don't know, famous in the in the nerdiest of circles, Tyler Cowen question that says, it goes, what do you do to train this comparable to a pianist practicing scales? What do you practice? Just it can be totally out there, or maybe you don't do anything like that, but I'm just curious to know.
I think writing is something I feel like I practice like a pianist. Okay. You were mentioning the quotes and the one-liner and the punchlines and all that. You get that through practice and practice and practice. When I write a tweet, sometimes I kind of iterate 20 times for one sentence. During my writing retreat last week, I basically managed to get 3 pages almost right, but I'd been trying to write for more than a month. I obsess not because not just because I want it to be perfect, but because I know that if I obsess that much, I'm going to get better. So it's a kind of practice and practice and practice. I think writing is a skill that you can get like a million times better. I'm already much, much better than I was. I know I can be even better than I am right now.
Let's unpack that a little bit. What did you do besides repetition? Is there any other books or authors or writing styles that you?
Oh, there is, yeah. So I think it's like mathematics, you have to, it's like sport, you have things that are basically stretching, there are things that are masterclass, you have different things. When I was 20 something, I practiced, like I take an object like this thing, like for example, it's post-it notes for a page, or
I have a
bookmarks.
bunch of those sitting next to me as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
So let's say I want to sell you that. I'm going to describe, say, oh, it's unique, or it's beautiful. And I was recording myself and say, I have to improvise for 5 minutes. So selling that. I was imagining that I was doing stand-up comedy, that I did that when I was writing my book. I was actually, my language in the original French edition of the book is very colloquial, sometimes a bit too much, like there are some intentional grammar mistakes because I was thinking, what would be the exact words I would use if I was speaking with a friend, explaining that. And I'm going to, when speech, the syntax and the grammar is not the same. You know that phenomenon, and it's very important to hear that when you want to write, to try to hear what language is actually really sounding like when you listen to it, not sounding to the way school has taught you to transcribe sentences when you speak. They may not even be sentences. It's kind of a flow of ups and downs and stops and repetition, and you reuse a word and you make mistakes but certain mistakes because you want a certain rhythm what you say. So try to listen. Make this exercise. Write down. Take a YouTube video of someone speaking. Write down like every word. It's kind of awareness of what the real language is. And for me, the real language is spoken. Now, there is a completely different angle. And here I have a very good video to share. I don't remember the name of the author, but we will be able to find it and link it.
And link it later, yeah.
It's a guy who's been teaching at the University of Chicago for years in a special department. His responsibility was to coach all the faculty about their writing issues and why their papers got rejected because of. And
I've seen this, or I've come across it. Maybe it was on your. Is it on your Twitter?
no, but maybe, but it's beautiful. It's perfect. It talks about the fact that no one cares about your ideas. No one cares about you. It has to be interesting. And the problem is never that you don't write well enough, that it's not original, that it's not correct. The problem is it's not interesting. And this is so surprising when you contrast it with the way writing is taught at school. And this is what he explained. You've been taught by people who are paid to read your essay and to grade you, but they only read it because they're paid to do it. They don't care about you. Now, if you're no longer a student, no one cares about what you do. And he says, I have this armchair in my office, and they sit in this armchair, and next to the armchair, there's a box of Kleenex. Because they start crying all the time. It's incredible. And Taleb, he says this incredible thing, that the great books are rarely well written. And that's exactly the same idea. That for a book to resonate, it has to be important at a very deep level. It has to be about what you're saying and why you're saying it and why you would take your friend and grab them by the shirt and say, hey, this thing is, you have to know that. It's so important. It's life or death. It's not about, when people say it's interesting, but they're not really interested. So there's something about being radically honest about what's really interesting. What would you personally pay for as a reader? And it's very hard to learn, but I think you can learn that. You can learn to hear that.
It's also very freeing, I find, because I've only recently kind of come to that same conclusion. I don't know if it's because I watched that video or read the transcript or something, but that sounds all very familiar. And then reading your book really solidified this for me. If you want to be interesting, you have to embrace the dissonance between your intuition and logic. I think that is like where interesting lives, really. And
exactly.
that was
You're correct. It has to be super sincere.
Yeah.
It has to be, and also a good exercise is take a book on Amazon, look at the first page. Do you find it really interesting? Like, not to say it's correct news, the guy is a professor or something or whatever, but is it really something that's moving for you? And then read the comments.
Yeah.
Not the ratings, but the comments. And you say, it's interesting, you learn things, and you say, the meaning of that is, no, it's not interesting. If it's written that it's, life-changing or best book you've ever read or something, okay, it means something. But so it's kind of recalibrate the expectations. And if you start doing that and you work hard on your patient, you're going to get so much better with time because you're going to be focusing on the right thing, not on the style, not on the grammar, not on the syntax. It does not really care. You're going to get there eventually, and ChatGPT will do it for you if you don't. But this is easy,
So I'll just tell you right now, one of the ways that I've found using whatever LLM, could be Claude or ChatGPT or whatever, is to record myself talking, explaining something, whatever it is, and then running it through ChatGPT. And usually it sucks the voice out of it, right? And so you have to go back in and put your voice back in, but it at least arranges your thoughts in a logical way for you, and it does something that is hard mentally. So it makes it easier a little bit, right? But then you have to go back in and do the also hard part of adding back in your voice, right? So it's not.
That's super interesting. I never tried that. I'm going to try that. I'm going to try a variant of that is to speak with my wife about something and to have a chat and see whether the actual conversation, the way I talk about it live, can be transcribed into something that makes sense.
So I'll tell you exactly what I do. I do the same thing. I have a conversation with my wife, or I have a walking treadmill. I'll walk on my treadmill and just kind of ramble. I take the transcript, I copy and paste the whole thing into Claude or whatever one you prefer, and I just say, please remove any redundancies and create a logical flow. I just keep it really simple like that, and it takes the whole thing and breaks it into like an outline and a logical flow, and then I go back in and I edit it. But it's one of the most magical experiences that you'll have with an LLM, in my opinion, because you can ask it a bunch of different things, but if you just record yourself ranting or having a conversation and ask it to organize it for you, it's completely magical. So try it.
I would try that. It's a great idea. I would try it.
Do you use ChatGPT, LLM?
Yeah, I prefer Claude. I think Claude is insanely better. I use it for a number of things. I use it for reference search, like who was this philosopher from that century who said this or that, and come with the answer. I use it for proof reading. Like, for example, you said my English is good. My Substack post, it went through Claude, and I said, okay. And I never asked for it to rewrite it because I don't think it writes very well, probably because being a writer, having my own voice, I don't want to be a bit of it. I just want the list of the correction, the changes. Most I will apply, some I will not apply because I'm intentionally provocative here and it's kind of trying to smooth it out, and I don't want to smooth it out something. But at least I know where I'm wrong, and my syntax is not perfect in English. I make mistakes, so I want to learn, and it improves because I see where I'm wrong, so I can learn from it.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'm using it for is for the book I'm writing. I copy paste chapter and say, what do you think about it? Please rate it between 0 and 100 on key dimensions.
On what?
On key dimensions. Choose what are the important dimensions. I just want like 3, 4, 5 dimensions on evaluation. And the thing is, so you have to be very careful because there's a trap here. If you start a chart and you copy a version of your chapter and you have a rating, and then you change it and you add another, it will go up because it's too polite. So you have to recalibrate it with a new chat window that's completely independent with no memory between them.
Right.
And then you know. And you should also ask it to recap it and to understand the positioning of it. Because if the positioning is not what you wanted, then you're in big trouble. So in a way, it's kind of the, in the Greek tragedy, there is the chorus, that represents the city. And I view Claude as the chorus. It's kind of the viewpoint of humankind, and they're my own singular viewpoint. And if I think that my book is about A and the chorus says my book is about B, then there's something wrong. I have to go back to the writing table,
Yeah.
So I use it for feedback. It's great. It's life-changing, seriously.
For a feedback and a sparring partner, it is so fun. It also helps me think. So I may not think in complete thoughts or sentences. It kind of adds in a little bit of extra to make it complete sometimes. And I'm like, that's exactly what I wanted to say. But wasn't doing it quite effectively. So yeah, love it. Try the voice recording. It is life-changing. You will enjoy that. I think I'm out of questions. Do you have any questions for me? I should ask that before we wrap up. But
I have a question about Substack. I think my brain is getting to the point where it's losing its creativity. So I cannot come up with something that adds to this conversation. We cover so many topics. No, the question, I think you want to write more than what you're writing now. And that might be the interesting question. Where do you see writing going? That's probably, if I read between the lines of everything you're interested in, there is something here.
Yeah, so I don't know if I want to be a writer or a thinker necessarily. It feels to me like running every day. So it's something hard that I do. It makes me think a little more clearly, and it connects me with a broader network of people that are preferably smarter and more experienced than I am, that I can learn from. And I mean, I certainly would love to just wake up every day and write, or have that be a thing. It's not an immediate possibility for me, but I think in retirement, like that's kind of where I'm headed. And so I'm trying to practice now, so that when I am in 15 years, if I'm lucky, and can kind of sail off into the sunset, I've already done the hard kind of grunt work of getting there, and I can do something meaningful. So I'm very much in the practice phase, and that's how I view my Substack. Is it's a practice. You're witnessing me,
So this is what got you interested in, I think, this idea of writing as a tool for clarity.
Yeah,
you view it as, and I think there will be a shift, in that age of saturation with media and all that. There is meditation that's is gaining a lot of traction, but I think writing is definitely an exercise of that nature, probably more rooted and more anchored in communication with other people. So there's that advantage, and I completely get it, and it's working well. You have very, very clear questions and very clear understanding of things.
Well, good. Thank you. I appreciate that. This is just something that feels creative and fun and social and vibrant. I don't know. That's the only way that I can describe it. And so I appreciate you taking the time. It was a pleasure, talking with you, and I'm really looking forward to the new book. When will it come out? How many years?
I should not make any promises. I'm very far from having written it. I'm starting to understand what the book is about. I find it super hard. So I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing. I'm transparent about that. I think there are too many books. So when you publish a book, it should be really important. So if it takes 3 years or 4 years, it takes 3 or 4 years. I don't care. I just want the book to be right.
So that's a whole nother topic, and I don't want to keep you forever. But how do you select what you read?
I read very little. I used to read much more when I was 20. I read books that become obvious to me that I really want to read that. I really need to read that right now. I find it hard to read, and I'm being honest. I'm reading less, probably because we're living in a very saturated age of social media and information and things to do and everything. So I try to this is what I was talking about earlier, about setting very, very high standards for writing, because it has to be very important. And for my writing and for my reading is the same. I think, books for centuries was the number one entertainment. The only thing you could do at night was reading a book. The only thing you could do on weekends was reading a book. And walking in the countryside, it gets boring after a while.
Walking in the countryside, though, that's where the ideas come, right?
You can do during the weekend, but at night you can do it. So at night, when there was no electricity and no music, no TV, what could you do? Nothing but reading. So that was a golden age of the novel. You have that creativity, that imagination, and all of that. And this thing is disappearing, but the books won't disappear. But the thing is, there's like 99% of the books that were like the Netflix series that you replace them with. And those books, I think, are going to die. I think. Not to fully die, because some people would like to practice this, but the one that really matters, the one that really changed the way you think about the world, it's still, you can only get that through books, because you need that time to be, meditating around every sentence and thinking, and you can do that in front of a video. You can do that. So this thing will survive. So that completely changes the stakes of writing, I think.
Do you reread any books?
Reread? Yes, but it's rare. I reread recently Down and Low in Paris and London by George Orwell, because I want to quote it in my book. So I had memories of the book I had read like 20 years ago, and I wanted to reread it.
Anything else that you reread?
I reread my book and think that every line sucks because I would write it differently now.
Well, you're wrong about that. It's not, no, it's phenomenal.
No, but I mean, but this is, I think this is normal. I think you have to be brutally honest and think, okay, I can do it better. Of course, I think it's quite good on some things. I'm not ashamed of it, but I see defects, and this is why sometimes when I, when I was writing my Substack article, I was going back to things that I needed to check in my book, and I realized how immature I was when I wrote it. But this is the normal process. If you don't feel that, there's something wrong with your writing. With your writing is this process of clarity, of getting to things being expressed in a way that is crisper and crisper and crisper and crisper. So if it doesn't get any crisper, it's probably because you're dead. You're not thinking anymore.
What I find is I need to get it out of my being in order to really inspect it, right? Because you can internally have these dialogues with yourself and have these ideas, but until you do a first draft of it, or in my case, like you, I write and I rewrite and I rewrite and I rewrite and I rewrite, and then finally I'm like, okay, I'm either sick of this or I'm just going to hit publish. Even the silly things like you said, like a tweet or whatever. Probably I don't like Twitter because I have to rewrite my sentence 15 times before I.
That's why I love it, actually, because it's so short that you can afford to do it.
Yeah.
But,
I guess my assumption is that everyone else just like fires off consciousness into the void and hopes that it hits. But yeah, I am not. I don't know. That is not my style. I'll just say it that way. But anything else before we wrap up?
I think this was a great conversation. Thanks a lot for inviting me to this podcast. And
it was my pleasure. Yeah.
Great conversation, many topics, sharp questions, connecting things that people usually don't talk about. Like people don't talk about 12th century philosophy all the time. So it's always a pleasure to connect that with the experience of meditating and wonderful conversation. Thanks a lot.